Hello everybody, here I am again, and today we're gonna talk about the history of our beloved dance, how it is developed from the very beginning until almost nowadays. This will be very interesting. It's a long lecture, and I hope you will have some experience with this new knowledge. When we talk about the history of Raksharki, or Baladi, or Oriental dance, the way you name it, we must talk about first the ancient Egyptian history. Why? Because the roots of this dance goes back to that time. The question is first, why the Egyptians documented everything they did in their life. We are very happy that they did so. But they did so because of their religion, because of their believing in second life. And because of this belief, they documented everything they did in their life, including dancing. So we will find a lot of illustration in the temples about the dance, 6,000 years ago. I will show you several slides to show you also that in ancient Egypt they danced it almost the same way that we dance today. You will also see that this documentation is very important to know that the way they illustrate things on the wall. And just to make sure that you understand this, they used to be very precise in showing the face, always the profile of the face, but the front of the body, to make sure that this represents exactly